Previously, I made this video where I talked about the recent Game Awards nominations for the Best Indie Game category and highlighted a problem where Dave the Diver shouldn't really qualify for an indie game. That video kind of left me thinking, like, what even is an indie game really? Like, is there some strict limit for a dev team size? Is there like some budget limitation? At which point the game stops being an indie game? Or like, what exactly is the defined term for an indie game? So I kind of decided to do a little bit of research on my own and kind of see if I can find some sort of strict definition for it. So on its face value, an indie game, short for independent video game, is a video game typically created by individuals or smaller development teams without the financial and technical support of a large game publisher, in contrast to most AAA games. The term itself is similar to that of independent film or independent music. It doesn't matter if the game is a 2D platformer or a 3D Souls-like ARPG, as long as a larger studio and by proxy shareholders did not have a say in the creative process. An article from Collider summarizes the topic with: the cultural definition of an indie game is confusing and imprecise because it is highly subjective, incapable of creating a rule everyone can use for analysis. Getting into the topic of what it is then that actually makes a game an indie game, a huge part that comes with the smaller development team size is usually creative freedom that the teams can have when developing their game. Indie games tend to explore innovative or experimental gameplay themes which would be deemed too risky for AA or AAA studios. Basically, as long as a larger publisher or developer isn't sticking their spoon in the soup and the team working on the game is of a smaller size, then the game qualifies as an indie game. Just having a publisher behind your game to help with the funding doesn't necessarily mean that your game is no longer an indie game though. There are multiple publishers that focus mostly on indie games and offer funding to games simply for sharing the profits. One such publisher, for example, is Devolver Digital, that has a solid long track record of publishing different indie titles. Large developers are often in a spot where they are unwilling to explore different gameplay forms or mechanics, leaving a lot of the thinking outside of the box to the indie developers. Sometimes these indie devs might strike gold in a sense, and their gameplay format becomes massively popular, at which point obviously some of the larger developers are going to start to look into copying the format for their own use, since it is now explored and deemed a risk-free development, since there are players that already seem to enjoy the format. A good example could be PUBG or Vampire Survivors. In a future where indie games get deemed more as an aesthetic or graphic style instead of actual development teams behind it, you could see the dilution of the term where we have more and more generic, risk-free indie games, and the actual innovative smaller team passion projects are buried within the category. Of course, we could also see a future where larger devs start to embrace the indie style more and innovate more with gameplay mechanics of their games, but when shareholders are involved, stuff like this is kind of unlikely to happen. So yeah, the main point to highlight in this video is that the development team size and the nature of the connection to the larger developer or publisher is what really defines an indie game to me. You can have a 5-person team working on their passion project, but if their publisher or parent developer is giving them funding, deadlines, or guiding the overall style or direction of the game, then it really doesn't qualify as an indie game anymore. Reading up on this more, I come to realize that different sources have different definitions, with some saying that as soon as you reach the tens in dev team size, or as soon as you get any external funding, your game is no longer indie, or that indie games just mean a game that is not appealing to the mainstream audience, regardless if there was a major developer behind it or not. So kind of summarizing my own thoughts at the end here, I kind of really think that the definition of indie game should stay limited to these smaller team projects where there isn't a large developer kind of providing all the funding and providing guidance to the game project. If it's just a publisher offering like funding and marketing in exchange for a share of the profits, then I think it still can count as an indie game because they're not interfering in the creative process itself, which is kind of, at least to me, that's what is the key factor in an indie game. So let me know what you think about this in the comments. Do you have a different view of what makes an indie game? Like and subscribe. I'll see you guys next time.